Hey, folks, this is Mike with the Battles of the First World War podcast. Joining us today are Roger Steward and Professor Mark Connelly, here today to talk about their new project, the new Ypres League. More on that in just a moment. Roger and I first met in 2022 when he guided myself and my friend Ryan around the Ypres battlefields. Roger came recommended by Bart P., also a good friend. Roger works as a battlefield guide in the Ypres area. And folks, he gives a fantastic day tour that I highly recommend. You may have heard Roger's name before as I reviewed his first book titled Studentenfriedhof to Soldatenfriedhof, A History of Langemark, German Cemetery, and Self-Guided Tour, here on the podcast. His second book is Reclaiming the Salient, Resurrecting the Great War Battlegrounds of Flanders Fields, and that has been out for over a year now. Professor Mark Connelly is a professor of modern British history at the University of Kent, Canterbury in the UK. From the University of Kent website, quote, Mark has broad interests in modern military history and warfare, culture, and society. He is particularly interested in the commemoration of the two world wars with a specialism in the work of the Imperial, now Commonwealth, War Graves Commission. He is also interested in popular perceptions of war and the armed forces in Britain and the Commonwealth from the mid-19th century, end quote. Professor Connelly is the author of numerous articles and books, and some of his books include the recent Postcards from the Western Front, Pilgrims, Veterans, and Tourists After the Great War, and The Great War, Memory and Ritual, Commemoration in the City and East London, 1916 through 1939. He also contributed to Cambridge University Press's 2017 release of The British Army and the First World War, part of the Armies of the Great War series of books. Professor Connelly and Roger join us today on the podcast to talk about that new Ypres League. So, folks, if you're new to the history of the First World War, then we'll start with just a few basics here. Ypres, Y-P-R-E-S, is named Ypres, I-E-P-E-R, today. Ypres, or Wipers, as it was called by the millions of British Tommies who served there throughout the Great War, was the site of at least 3 massive battles during the war. I say at least because I have heard reference of a 4th Battle of Ypres during 1918. Speaking as an American here, Ypres today is practically a British town, and that is not meant in any negative way. It's easy to see because the city, as well as its fields and hills and nearby villages outside its gates, are holy ground to the United Kingdom and to the British military. Some 200,000 members of the BEF fell in battle here, and tens of thousands remain unrecovered from the Flanders fields all around them. Ypres holds a special place in the heart of British remembrance of the Great War, symbolized every evening by the playing of the last post at Menin Gate. That is a moving ceremony not to be missed when you visit. So here's a little about the new Ypres League before we dive deeper. From Professor Connelly, quote, a remembrance project aimed at preserving the memory of soldiers from all nations who fell in the Ypres Salient during the Great War. The new Ypres League is based on the original Ypres League that was present in Ypres in the years after the First World War. Formed in September 1920 by Colonel Henry Beckles Wilson, the original Ypres League was the first British remembrance organization of its kind. With King George V as patron-in-chief and Lord French as president, the League quickly expanded and by the 1930s had branches not only in Great Britain, but all over the world. Membership was originally aimed at veterans who had served in the Ypres Salient and families of men who fell in the salient. These members were presented with a coveted certificate of membership on joining. Membership was also available to the general public, but these members received no certificate. By the 1930s, the League numbered several thousand members and could name such personalities as Lord Haig, Sir Fabian Ware, Lord Plumer, and Beatrice Bryce as committee members, amongst many notable others. The League had specific aims which evolved over time as each were achieved. They were responsible for the foundation of St. George's Memorial Church in Ypres, the placing of demarcation stones at key points in the Ypres Salient, recording the locations of cemeteries and memorials, and assisting thousands of pilgrims on their trips to the Salient. In order to achieve these aims, the League launched several publications, including the iconic Ypres Times and Beatrice Price's book, The Immortal Salient. A map was produced for pilgrims visiting the area, outlining the old front lines and the battlefield sites where their loved ones fought and fell. The League also produced badges, ties, and blazer badges for their supporters to purchase and so raise funds for the League. The advent of the Second World War was to see the end of the Ypres League in its beloved city of Ypres, and this once great and influential organization was consigned to the history books. Remembrance in the Ypres Salient of today presents us with a whole new set of unique challenges. The last veterans of the Great War left us a few years ago, but remembering the fallen in the Salient is still as relevant today as it was in the 1920s and 30s. Although the Great War ended over 100 years ago, the Salient still regularly gives up its grisly harvest. The remains of over 55,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers lay unrecovered in the cold clay of Flanders. These remains are still being recovered at a rate of 30 to 40 bodies a year. Once the remains have gone through the identification process, they are reburied with military honors in one of the many CWGC cemeteries in the area. These ceremonies and the sacrifice made by these soldiers require official recognition in the form of wreath laying and the attendance of a standard bearer. In addition to the burials, there are many ceremonies that require official attendance, anniversaries of major battles, special last post cemeteries, visits from VIPs, all of which require official attendance. However, as time marches on, there are fewer and fewer people and organizations available to perform these tasks. With this issue in mind, we announce the launch of the new Ypres League. So, Roger and Professor Mark Connelly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks very much. It's a great pleasure to be joining you tonight.
Yeah, this is fantastic. So, if you would, I have a question here for Mark, if you're okay. And I read up on it a little bit on the internet, so the whole dangerous thing of a little bit of research. But since you're working at the University of Kent, Canterbury, I wanted to ask, and I hope I don't start an international incident, but are you a Kentish man or a man of Kent?
You see, now that's a fascinating one, because I'm a kind of migrant to Kent. I was born and grew up in London, and then I got the job at Kent. And one of the first things that was asked me, am I a Kentish man or a man of Kent? And do you know, it's one of those things that always confuses me, because I know it's to do with what side of the Medway you're born on, east or west of the way the Medway flows through the county, which is its defining river. I think, in US terms, it'd be regarded as a stream of no significance, but in British terms, it's important. So I think what I am, because of where I am in Kent, I'm pretty sure I'm an adopted man of Kent. But you're going to have a deluge of people that telling me that I've got it wrong.
I'll just forward the comments to you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. All right. So, gentlemen, if you would, so I've got my first question here for you guys, and it's, if you would please just tell us a little bit more about yourselves, anything that I may have left out in the bio, and also how you two became interested in the Great War.
Go for it, Roger.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So on the, I suppose, the worst end of the 50s in terms of my age. But I became interested in the First World War when I was around about 10 years old. And I've discussed this actually in the past with people. And as I've discussed it, it turns out that the reason I got involved in the First World War, or had this kind of passion created, is the same for quite a few other people, actually, of my age, which is when we were growing up in Britain in the 1970s, all the kids' comics were World War II based comics. So World War II comic strips like Commando, for example. And I would rush avidly every Saturday morning to the local newsagents, to get my comic. But one I used to read was called Battle Action, or Battle, it started off as. And it started to produce, just out of the blue, a comic strip called Charlie's War. And it was all about a British soldier called Charlie Bourne and his experiences in the trenches on the Western Front. But the actual artwork was very, very graphic in terms of, the rats, the bodies, the mud, the gas attacks. So as a 10-year-old, I was hooked. And then continued to read about it, read All Quiet on the Western Front when I was at quite an early age as well. And then continued to read it and study it for the rest of my life. And lucky enough, through fate, to have ended up living here, just on the outskirts of Ypres. My wife is from here. And I now run as Mike mentioned earlier, my own Battlefield Tour company. So I've been a guide here since, I suppose, around about 2010. But I'm really, really lucky to do what I do. I'm in an area I love. I meet great people. And I'm covering a subject which, I'm absolutely passionate about. And, of course, I'm lucky enough, as Mike has hinted on, to be able to write 2 books on the subject as well. So, yeah, all in all, things have come together for me, I suppose, in terms of this. Mark?
Yeah, it's a similar-ish trajectory to Roger's. I mean, I too was a hugely avid fan of the Charlie's War comic strip in Battle, which, as I then found out, as I started to do a bit more serious reading in my teens, because a big moment for me, as I was getting more and more interested in the First War, one of the things that I asked for my 13th birthday was Martin Middlebrook's book, The First Day on the Somme. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I read that, and I can remember that summer. I'm by coincidence, I'm a July birth, and so was reading it, a few days after the 1st of July anniversary, and was sitting up late into the night as it was getting me more and more that this incredible tragedy of the 1st of July 1916. And then a few years later, I was lucky enough, because my interest had grown so much. My parents very kindly, for my 16th birthday, paid for me to go on a battlefield tour with Martin, and I went to the Somme. And one of the very first, I remember it distinctly. The very first place we visited was the Loos Memorial in Dud's Corner Cemetery, and that was a seminal moment for me, because it was at that moment where I became obsessed with the cemeteries and the memorials of what was then the Imperial War Graves Commission back in the 20s and 30s, and the staggering beauty of those sites and what that did for our understanding of the war. And I suppose ever since, I've been trapped, and I think perhaps this is something that a lot of people find. There is something about the First World War, or the Great War, as I'm always going to call it, that has exactly the same kind of elegiac qualities as a Shakespeare or a Greek tragedy. There is something, I think, in it that is so haunting about fate, about seemingly a predestined generation that was going to reach its end. Now, we know, of course, a lot of this are perceptions rather than the reality, but we've also had that fascinating thing which continues to interest me. That in some ways we might argue, and this is without trying to be facetious in any way, the war was only fought for just over 4 years, but we've been remembering it for over 100. That the memory is bigger than the event. It's the event itself is the tip of the iceberg. The way we perceive it, the way we think about it, the way we reinvent it and recast it, and particularly the effect then that visiting those landscapes has on us is my ongoing fascination and passion. And that's how I know Roger, because I have spent a lot of my time in Ypres. I think my wife and kids think I live there and only come home to get the laundry done. And then I go back out to have lots of good discussions with Roger, and we tramp across various damp fields together.
Well, that's fantastic. And I was thinking, as you were just talking about, that feeling, that haunting feeling. And I've spoken with people who literally say they feel some places are haunted, but I also there's something when if you've ever driven through the Argonne Forest further out in east, on those foggy French mornings, I turn a corner in the forest and I'm waiting for a column of American doughboys to like come out of the mist and just like pull out in front of me, and yeah, it's just like that feeling of like, I don't know, that this is where they were, this is where they walked, and you can just still feel their presence. Wow. So how did you two gentlemen come together to work on this new Ypres League?
Well, I've known Mark for some years. I think, Mark, the first time we met, I think, was round about, was it 2014, when I was chairman of the British League branch, and we got together to do an exposition on remembrance in Ypres. And I picked up Mark's book as well on Ypres itself, and that was kind of my first introduction, to the Ypres League. And the actual organisation really started to fascinate me, and also that post-war period, the period of early tourism in the Salient, which I cover, somewhat or a little part in my book as well, when people were touring the area, and it was all still there. The trenches were still there. There was wrecked tanks everywhere, entrances to tunnels, dugouts. There were still bodies laying above ground. Wow. When people were touring the area. So that whole thing was a really fascinating thing for me to pick up on, and it's down really to Mark's book on Ypres, where I kind of got interested in that post-war period. So that's really how, for me, the seeds, I suppose, were sown in terms of the new Ypres League itself. Mark?
Yeah, and I think we're both coming at this from that sense, as Roger said slightly earlier, that we've reached now a stage where obviously all competence are gone. We're rapidly reaching the point where all of the children of the combatants have gone. Even the youngest of them will be pretty elderly now. So what we have, though, is to use a phrase that the Flanders Field Museum is rightfully stresses, is that the landscape is the final living witness. And one of the ways it lives, ironically, is by giving up the dead. Every now and then they come to the surface. So, as Roger put into the objectives of the new league, to have an organisation that commits itself to being present during things like rededication ceremonies, burial ceremonies, I think is really important, because it gives those men of whatever nation they might be the dignity and respect they deserve, particularly if relatives are not easily traceable or it is an unknown body. So I think that element of it being something of respectful remembrance of all combatants is really important to both of us.
I think that it's a good point that Mark has just raised, because when you look at the original history of the original Ypres League, originally it was for veterans, who had served in the Salient, or family members, of men who fell in the Salient. But they then expanded it towards the end to accept members of the Belgian army as well, who had fought in the area as well. And we were talking, and we kind of came to the conclusion that had the league carried on and evolved, it would have been, as Mark has just said, all-encompassing in terms of all nationalities. And that's one thing we're very keen on promoting with the new Ypres League, is, we want to commemorate all soldiers of all sides, who fell in the Ypres Salient during the Great War. So I think from my perspective, how it originally came about, or part of my, I suppose, belief in remembrance, if you will, is partly down to what I do here for a living, because I'm very conscious of the fact that I take money out of this. This is my job. It's not only my job, it's my passion, that I earn money from Battlefield Tours. But I want to put something back. And to be fair, I've always been of that mind. That's why I joined the Legion. At the time, I was chairman of the branch here for a couple of years as well. And we sat one night in Ypres itself over a beer, and we were kind of talking. And we suddenly realised that when you look at the remembrance organisations here now, you know, these guys have done it, and they've done a sterling job for year after year after year after year. But some of these guys now, bless them, because of their age, you know, they can hardly carry a standard anymore. They can't walk the length of the Menin Road up to the Menin Gate, for example. And the concern was, you know, give it 10 years or even less, there would be nobody doing this. So that's the reason we really wanted to get a new organisation going with a fresh outlook as well, maybe new membership, and to try and keep, you know, these acts of remembrance continuing, because as Mark said, you know, it's essential. You know, it's a very, very important thing.
You know, I have here, the next question was like, you know, why did you look to restart this organization? But I think you've already started addressing it. But the point, I got a couple of questions here that are like, how are like the local Belgians, how are they reacting to this? Are you getting interest from them?
Massively, yeah. I mean, one of the things we've done is to make sure we contact, of course, all of the local organisations. Mm-hmm. So they know what we're about. We're a registered Belgian charity, so everything is legal and above board, and adheres to the rules of, you know, of Belgian charity legislation. We've contacted the town. We've been in contact with the alderman and the mayor and the head of tourism. I've been in contact today with the area commander of West Flanders, the Belgian Army, of course, the Legion branch, all of the local remembrance branches as well. Everybody, without fail, thinks it's a great idea, and it's something which is needed, which is fantastic. Yeah,
oh, that's awesome. And then my other question was, when I read in the introduction, and then it came up again. So the original Ypres League ended, of course, with World War II. I'm assuming with the next German invasion and the long occupation. Why was the Ypres League then not? It doesn't seem like it was resurrected after World War II. Was it? Can you guys speak to that?
Yeah, Mark,
sorry, just because it kind of goes into, shall we say, a long, deep sleep. As you say, the war interrupts it and sounds its death knell, but it doesn't actually die during the war. You know, after the Second World War, there are still listed committee members. You know, it has its secretary still, and indeed, what was then the British Board of Trade is regularly writing in the 1950s. You know, because they hold stock in terms of books, souvenirs, so they want to know, you know, is anything being exported, imported? You know, is there anything that we need to know in terms of taxes, customs, or anything like that? So there's a bit of a correspondence, but and not a lot is going on. Certainly, there are no more publications of their journal. That ends, and it's only in the very late 50s where I think a few key people do then suddenly die, and no one is sure what's going on anymore. But you know, the Board of Trade, from its point of view, declares it a dead organisation. So in that sense, what you might say is, just like old soldiers, it doesn't die, it simply fades away. It gently fades away over a long time.
Right. And then one day you look around and it's like, oh no, like they're gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
No longer here with us. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, Mike, also, the league here had a huge impact in the Ypres area during that interwar period, in terms of, it was not taken out of the area, it was putting things back to the area, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
so for example, you know, which you mentioned earlier about its links with St George's Memorial Church. You know, it was lobbying for for a main monument, i.e. the Menin Gate, for example. It placed 7 demarcation stones, you know, on the areas, the furthest point of the German advance in 1918. The most famous one probably being at Hellfire Corner. It produced, you know, it's like Mark just said, its own journal. It produced maps for pilgrims. It helped pilgrims come over, you know, to visit the war graves. So it had a huge impact. And for me and Mark also, I think all of that hard work and the dedication they showed over those years was forgotten.
Yep.
And it's all been overlooked. So it'd be such a shame to consign that all to history when, it doesn't need to be, when we can use it to carry on, the acts of commemoration.
And things, as Roger mentioned, the maps, the two main Ypres League maps are now both wonderful historical snapshots of what it was like around Ypres in the mid-1920s, particularly where they're marking up roads that are still impassable in winter because they haven't been properly rebuilt yet. But at exactly the same time, it's still completely relevant today because it is so comprehensive. They mark everything. And indeed, one of our great sources of information about the German cemeteries is because the League lobbies through the Imperial War Graves Commission, it asks for a complete list of German cemeteries. Now, as we know, nothing has been kind of concentrated and dragged out of the landscape more than the German cemeteries. Right. So, yeah, through its efforts, through it publicizing it in its journal, we've got a complete list of what were the extant German cemeteries in the early 1920s. So it was a truly remarkable organisation. I think probably the only duff note that it hit was through its leader, Beckles Wilson, was the initial obsession that it should be left in ruins, almost regardless of what the local people felt. I think that was a typical bit of British high-handed neo-colonialism. Shall we say? We show up, we own this place now. You just do what we say because it's all in a good cause, and you understand that, don't you? It's in a good cause, so you won't mind. And yeah, that idea, fortunately, is just crushed by de facto local action of people coming back that makes that an impossibility. But I think once they get that through their system, as Roger was saying, everything else they commit themselves to is of really great value and tells, although obviously there is the leaning towards the British and British imperial story, nonetheless, that their books, their literature, everything they produce is telling the story of the whole war in the Ypres region, and they are including every narrative.
I think also, Mark, as well, to highlight kind of the importance of the League at the time, when you look at the members of or not the members so much, but the committee, for example, the patrons, if there's a First World War personality, if you will, they're there. Even down to, Tubby Clayton from, from Talbot House, for example, Sir Fabian Ware from the War Graves Commission. All of these guys who had links to the area were also members of the League. It's like a who's who of the First World War. It's a fantastic document when you read actually who was to do with the League. Yeah, absolutely.
That's fantastic. So you guys are now, so you're starting up. So as you're in the starting up phase, and I love this emphasis on giving back to the community, just as the original League did. What are your short-term aims for the new Ypres League?
In terms of the new Ypres League in the short term, it's basically raising money at the moment so we can continue in the long term, if you see what I mean, Mike. Because we've already started to attend ceremonies, okay? So we're already recognised by lots of organisations now, particularly the MOD as well. So we're getting official invites to ceremonies and burials, okay? And you'll see some of those on the website. We've posted some pictures already. But one of the issues, but one of the costs is of course every time we lay a wreath, we have to purchase it, and it costs us maybe 30, 35 euros. So there's one cost, for example. Interestingly, also, the old Ypres League, the original Ypres League, had their own original standard, the original flag, which seems to have gone missing sort of roundabout post-World War II. So one of the things we're also doing is we're putting out feelers to see if that can be tracked down. But of course, if it can or if it can't, we are having our own standard now currently being made. But we have to have the standard made. We've got to buy it, of course, buy the pole, all the brass fittings, the standard bearers equipment. So that's another thing we want to raise money to pay for. because it's already been welcomed by the town, the fact that on November the 11th, we'll be able to parade underneath the Menin Gate on Armistice Day with the new standard. And so in terms of the short-term aims, it's basically raising money. We've produced some enamel pins as well, we're selling. So then we can start looking at achieving the long-term goals as well.
So what is Ypres Day, which you're looking to reestablish in the town? What was that?
Mark?
That was 31st of October was Ypres Day, to mark the first crucial moment in the first battle of Ypres. And in many ways, it's part of that, again, this weird folklore that the Great War builds up for itself from the start. That obviously, as we all know, 11th of November is Armistice Day. And it always strikes me that is, shall we say, the perfect month in which to end the war. I often say to my students, if the war had have ended in the same month in which it had started, do you, or for the British that is, if it had been sort of July, Augusty time, do you think we would remember it in much the same way? Or is it something to do with the fact that it occurs in one of the deadest months of the year? November was the ancient Celtic month of the dead that came in, funnily enough, on Halloween. 31st of October was the day in which, or the night in which the dead were thought to come out of their graves, and would run loose. And of course, it's Christianized. It becomes Halloween, and you get All Saints and All Souls Day. So we have this perfect combination of the first Battle of Ypres starting really being the curtain raiser for what's known in the British Empire in the 20s and 30s as Armistice Tide. That period, so almost like Passion Tide. It gets that quasi-religious element leading up to Armistice Day. So it would kick off the remembrance season in London. You would get a parade to the Cenotaph, often with Princess Beatrice attending, because obviously she loses her son, Prince Maurice, in the Salient, and rather nicely, and I think this was a lovely gesture by Beckles-Wilson, a very shrewd one. He knew it was pointless trying to adopt the poppy. The poppy was the British Legion's symbol, so they would have cornflowers. And obviously, and cornflower was for the French as well. The French ex-service organisations adopted that. So it would be cornflower blue for Ypres Day, and say in many ways was the curtain raiser for Armistice Day, and was obviously then in Ypres itself, a city deep in the heart of Flanders, a cathedral, a Catholic cathedral city, where it's also, you've got your All Saints and All Souls Day coming up there. So there's a nice kind of collusion, shall we say, of ancient diaries and calendars and ancient cycles of the year coming together with the recent history of the war. Sorry, that was a very long-winded response to that. Roger knows when to lie down on his bunk bed when I get going. He really does.
No way. So this is the place for long answers. Like I love this stuff. I think most of the listeners do. We're here for it as the kids.
If Mike, if yourself and the listeners, when you get a chance to have a look at the website, if you have a look at the badge of the Ypres League with the new Ypres League, it's based on the original badge of the Ypres League. Okay? Now, October the 31st is the day the Germans were stopped at Hillyveld. So as the league considered Ypres being the gateway to the Channel ports, that's the symbolism they use very much in terms of their insignia. And we've kind of just took that a step further forward. So when you look at the old Ypres League badge and our own, it's the central part of it is a portcullis, which represents, the gateway to the Channel ports.
Right.
But the portcullis is being guarded by a lion. So the lion, in effect, of the empire. So that's, the reason why we have developed, the insignia as we do to commemorate Ypres Day, because it's the day also the Germans stopped at Hillyveld, just up the end of the Menin Road.
Interesting choice on October 31st. I wasn't making the connection with the first Battle of Ypres. I was trying to think, like, was that when it was liberated in 1918? Like, that would make sense. But like, no, it's interesting that they brought it back to the first battle when here they were stopped. And
this is touch and go whether we stay in the war or the Germans break through, and that's it.
Yeah,
so that's the reason why they focus on that.
Yeah,
and I also think it shows something, despite the fact, as we know, that all of the combatant armies, are going to burst the hoops of their pre-war regulars. They're all going to rely on conscripts or that strangeness of the British and American traditions of having volunteers. But what we see here, for a British army that was all conscripts with the odd volunteer left by 1918, is that massive veneration for the original BEF, for the old contemptibles, for the Mons star wearers, who are going to be venerated across the Britannic world in the 20s and 30s, and that term old contemptible, which will be one in common parlance until well into the 60s and 70s, where it perhaps becomes something that only you might say Great War aficionados understand. But it's interesting, yes, that the League chooses this moment and builds up that and maintains that mystique of the old contemptibles through doing that.
Right. It also makes me think of something I read about the first Battle of Ypres, where it was described as I'm probably going to butcher it here, but it was the immolation of the original BEF. So even heavier meaning, like looking at that first battle. Yeah, and those first contingent of guys that went over. Mark, the demarcation stones you mentioned. I know you mentioned one as like marking the furthest advance of German troops. Could you tell us what they were and when they were put into place? And do any still last today? And any still exist?
Oh, yeah. I mean, originally it's the idea of the French and Belgian touring clubs, the moto touring clubs, is to have these bournes, as they're called in French, to mark the points of the furthest advances in the German spring offensives of 1918. And so they run across the entire Western Front to so you'll find them down in the Argonne region and all the rest of it. So that they are there. It happened that as this idea was floated, the Ypres League stepped in to say that it would sponsor the ones around Ypres. It would carry the cost of that, and so they were put in, with their very emotive, beautiful piece of emotive poetry. Really, here the invader was brought to a standstill. That Kipling-esque high diction. Not here the invader, was stopped in his tracks, or brought to a standstill. And the way that you denote which force fought on that spot is each of the army's different helmets. Okay. So you can work it out, and there are various distinctive bits of kit, like there's a water canteen inscribed on it. And as Roger said, the one that ends up being most famous in the Britannic world is the one at Hellfire Corner, which has moved around a little bit over the years as the road's been widened, and a roundabout rotunda has been put in. But that's the most famous one. And of course, as Roger can tell us about the famous one that goes missing in the Second World War.
Yeah. So the League were responsible, as Mark said, for placing 7 stones. I think they equate to about, if you were to work it out in terms of cost in today's terms, it comes to something like about £19,000, I think, for each demarcation stone. So a huge amount of money at the time. Made of carved from solid or from pink granite. But one apparently goes missing in the Wiltshire stone. So there's a little village just outside of Ypres called Wiltshire. And that stone apparently, it goes missing during the Second World War. And according to sort of local folklore, local legend, it was taken by the Germans.
Right.
There's been claims of, this photograph apparently of it being loaded onto the back of a lorry, but nobody's kind of seen it. It's all kind of Yeah, is it true? Is it folklore? Who knows?
Right.
But one of the aims we would like to do, when you come and have a look at the website, under the donate section, there's a little line of text at the bottom, and it says our long-term goals include at least 2 major appeals related to the Ypres Salient, which will be announced. One of them is to do with the demarcation stones. First of all, they're all protected now by Flemish heritage, so they're protected by law, but they still need updating. They're becoming weathered now. The lettering is illegible in some of them now, for example. So it'd be nice to get them recut if possible. And what I would really, really like to do, I know it's highly unlikely that we could ever find the missing one from Wiltshire, okay, but would like to get it replaced.
Okay.
Which would be a phenomenal achievement if we could do that. So the first port of call is of course to see if we can find the original, but then start looking at making an appeal to see if we can replace the missing one, because that would be a very, very special thing to be able to do.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. So demarcation stones, markers of important events, important places in the Ypres Salient, and important points of memory. This question, this is a little bit like tongue in cheek here. Why do we need information boards, and why do we need them in Hellfire Corner in particular? And I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of answer my own question, but Roger, I hope you'll expand on it, because when you drove us around Ypres that day, there was no signage to say that we were in Hellfire Corner. And I gleefully pointed it out to my wife and daughter every time we drove through, like, oh, you're in Hellfire Corner, most dangerous spot on the Western Front. As you see, there's no sign. So, yeah. So that's a huge problem right there. But
yeah,
can you tell us about like obviously, information boards for Hellfire Corner and other places?
Yeah, I mean, the Hellfire Corner one in particular, I think, because of the significance of Hellfire Corner, as you just alluded to,
right?
There have been many, many requests over the years by different people, different organisations, to put a monument there, and it's always been knocked back. I think because of safety issues, because it's a roundabout, and they're worried where people are going to park, where they're going to stand, where they're going to cross the road, or whatever.
Right.
So the idea was really, if we had a smaller information board next to the demarcation stone, which is already there, so in effect you're not really adding to it, and then using that as an opportunity to tell the story of the Ypres League and the story of Hellfire Corner as well, that would really kind of solve, it would give us, that'd solve 2 issues, if you see what I mean. Funnily enough, I've had a meeting with the town this morning with regards to this, and in theory, they have no problem with it. If we can raise money for the board and the police are happy in terms of the placement of it, in terms of its safety, for example, that's a distinct possibility. This one might happen. So for me personally, as a guide, to tell people you're at Hellfire Corner and you drive around a roundabout, it's not quite the same, is it? So it's nice to have something tangible there to actually mark the fact, or it is what it is.
That's awesome. So you mentioned earlier, you spoke to this, but just to bring it up and maybe talk a little bit more about it, who are you looking for to join as members of the new Ypres League?
From my perspective, anybody who's got a passion for the First World War, anybody who's got a personal connection to the area, anybody who's got a relative who fought here, anybody who just likes to read about it, but particularly people who want to help, to support and help us continue, with the commemoration process here, because it's well over 100 years ago now, of course, but it still carries on. Having been on tour with me, maybe having read some of my books and Mark's books as well, you'll know the First World War still claims casualties here every year, or most years, because of the unexploded ordnance, for example. So it's still a very, very relevant thing. So we want people to look at the website. We will be offering a membership coming up, but donations at the moment are crucial in terms of us being able to carry this project forward. Mark, do you have any anything to add? Or?
And I think it's kind of really important. We often use these words, the importance of remembrance, it's important to commemorate, and then there's a bit of me that says, well, remember what, commemorate what, what is the point? And it strikes me that one of the things that all of the battlefields of the Great War do, and something the new Ypres League, by its commitment to wanting to be present at things like reburials and rededication services, is that it then focuses us on the misery that war is, the pain it causes. Now, I don't know, I'm not sort of sitting here talking to you as an absolutist pacifist or anything like that. One of the reasons I'm sitting here is because a lot of brave people in the past took decisions, which I'm glad that I'm not going to have to make, and risk themselves in ways that I've never been called upon. So I'm not doing that. But it strikes me, in a world with the open horrors that we are seeing around us at the moment, sometimes some people just chuck around too glibly. We should bomb them. We should take those out. We should do this. We should do that. Let's think, if only we could all think about the misery, the pain of what war costs. This is ultimately what it means. And it's not just soldiers in a city like Ypres. When you do immerse yourself in it, you realize that it's certainly not just soldiers or the misery of war that forced the people of this city and its region to flee, to become refugees. Then they came back, and as Roger just said, because of the nature of the clear-up operation, have been risking their lives for 100 years because of what it left behind. War, as we know, sees some of the greatest expressions of humanity, of bravery, the greatest things that are in the deep in the human soul. But we've also got to think what a pity it is that it takes that extremity sometime to release it. That we've got to think about the cost of war, and I think that's what the new Ypres League will also help us to do, to focus on its costs.
I think also. Go ahead. Sorry, Mike, but just one aspect for myself also is, I kind of often stand there, when we're on tours and we're in the cemeteries and we're looking at the ages on the headstones, and of course you start, relating it to your own family, to your own kids and whatever. And it is this thing, this phrase which we use a lot, this debt of honour. Everything I enjoy in my life today, everything I've experienced today in my life at the age of 56, a lot of those guys didn't have a chance to do it. Because they believed in something at the time, they stood up for what was important to them, and ultimately paid the ultimate price. But it means that we can live our lives today, in the freedoms, in some parts of the world, in the freedoms that we do. So it's hugely, hugely important that, these guys are not only not forgotten, but also, as Mark said, we kind of learn from that as well. And use their experiences and their sacrifices in a positive way as well.
Yeah, I just got back from Washington D.C. and the Pershing Park, named after the American General Pershing. It's right next to the White House. It's now being renamed the World War I National Memorial, that will be officially unveiled there next year, I believe. On the back of the main monument that's going to be there's this quote that I'm just going to paraphrase here, but it's like, why? It's almost like you're speaking of hearing from the soldiers themselves. Then they're saying, why did we die? Like we leave you our deaths. It's up to you to give them their meaning. And I think with your new Ypres League, focusing on them, on the terrain around them, the people still affected by the war, simply because the guns went silent in 1918, doesn't mean that. I recall, I believe it was 4 Belgian soldiers were killed in 1996 trying to defuse a gas shell that went off And so like that, that war goes on in a sense, like it still claims its victims sometimes. So we definitely need to remember them, but also, yeah, those guys, those 21, those 25-year-olds, like they didn't get to become old and have arthritis and grandkids and the daily issues that we have. It's like, no, they will remain forever young, and they were robbed by fate of the opportunity to grow old, because there was this great task came to them, and they stepped in, and as they would say, they did their bit. So yeah, that's very, very commendable. So Roger, how can folks find you and join up?
Best way to contact us and to see what we're doing is via the website. So it's www.newypreleague.com. Please, guys, take a good look at all the stuff we've put on there. There's a history of the old Ypres League, the aims of the new Ypres League as well. There's some pictures of what we've been doing so far. But there's also a donate section as well. And I really can't emphasize this enough. If you can afford to donate something and you wish to, it will be put to great use and we will greatly appreciate it. There are set donation buttons there, €5, €10, whatever. If you wish to donate less, just send me a message via the contact form, or a larger donation than what is on the donation buttons. Again, please do the same. But please be aware that we will use your donations carefully and put them to the best use we possibly can. And you can keep in contact with us, with the website. We'll be constantly updating the website in terms of what we're doing, what we've attended, what ceremonies we've done, for example. And we've got a couple of guys at the minute working on some social media stuff as well. So quite soon we'll be up and running on, the normal sort of social media sites as well. So please, come and have a look at the website.
Awesome. Mark, anything you would like to add?
I think it's great. In some senses, what I see here, and it brings us back to the start, doesn't it? That this lingering footprint of the war, and in particular, Ypres on the imagination, and the amazing way in which it puts its hooks into us. The special landscapes of the Western Front, and the way they do act as a magnet for the emotions and the intellect. And I think the new Ypres League is both a kind of reflection of that, but also hopefully, as Roger was saying, a way of channeling interests and commitments into some really worthy activities.
All right. Well, folks, links to the new Ypres League will be in the episode notes. So please do sign up, do consider supporting this organization. It's going to be a key way to continue commemoration and remembrance efforts as we start to get further away from the World War I centennial years. So a way to keep the memory of these men alive, and the memory of that area and the people of that area as well, and to remember what happened there. So Mark and Roger, thank you so much for coming on the podcast this afternoon for me, this evening for you. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure.
Yeah, and thank you, Mike, for giving us the opportunity to reach out to you guys with regards to the new Ypres League. Awesome.
Roger, I will be in your neighborhood in late July if you're around. Would be nice to catch up with you.
Look forward to that. Yeah,
that'd be awesome. All right, gentlemen. We'll go ahead and say good night. Take care.
Yes, have a good day. Bye-bye.